My name is Rosemary, and I just turned 28 last month. I was a freelance graphic designer sharing a Brooklyn apartment with my two best friends from college, Marcus and Sophie. We had been living together for 3 years, and I thought we were family. That was until my birthday, when they handed me an eviction notice as a gift. Little did they know that my wedding gift to them would be the one thing that shattered their perfect world. Before I tell you how my entire world collapsed on my birthday, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turned my heartbreak into the ultimate revenge. Let me take you back to how it all started. 3 years ago, Marcus, Sophie, and I found this beautiful 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. It was a bit above our budget, but we all fell in love with the large windows, hardwood floors, and the rooftop access that gave us a stunning view of the city skyline. We each had our own bedroom, shared the spacious living room, and took turns cooking in the small but functional kitchen. The walls were covered with our art. My designs, Sophie's photography, and even some of Marcus's amateur paintings. It was truly our home. Our friendship went back 6 years to our first day at art school. I remember walking into the orientation hall nervous and alone when Marcus accidentally spilled his coffee on my new white sneakers. Instead of being upset, I laughed it off, and he offered to buy me lunch as an apology. Sophie was his lab partner in digital media class, and soon the three of us became inseparable. We pulled all-nighters for project deadlines, celebrated each other's small victories, and were shoulders to cry on during breakups and family problems. Marcus was my rock. He was the one who encouraged me to pursue freelance graphic design when I felt stuck at my corporate job. When my grandmother passed away during our second year in college, he drove 5 hours with me to attend the funeral. He was patient, kind, and always seemed to know the right thing to say. He was tall with dark curly hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. His laugh was contagious, and his hugs felt like home. Sophie was different. She was the type of person who seemed to excel at everything she did. With her perfect blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went, Sophie had always been the golden girl. She graduated with honors, quickly landed a prestigious marketing job at a top agency, and seemed to navigate life with an ease that I both admired and envied. She was ambitious, organized, and particular about how things should be done. Our apartment was filled with memories. The dent in the wall from when we tried to move the couch by ourselves. The wine stain on the carpet that we covered with a rug after Sophie's birthday party 2 years ago. The chipped blue mug that was unofficially mine because Marcus and Sophie knew it was my favorite. We had built a life together in that space, and I thought it would be our home for many more years. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs. The hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The way Sophie's smile seemed a bit forced when I talked about future plans for the apartment. The lingering looks between her and Marcus that I dismissed as nothing important. But when you trust people completely, you become blind to the red flags waving right in front of you. My parents had moved to Florida after retirement, so Marcus and Sophie became my chosen family in New York. We spent holidays together, nursed each other through illnesses, and celebrated promotions and accomplishments. They were the first people I called with good news, and the ones who heard my tearful rants after bad client meetings. My work as a freelance graphic designer was fulfilling but unstable. Some months, I would land several big projects and treat everyone to dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Other months I would barely make ends meet counting pennies until the next payment cleared. The feast or famine nature of freelancing was stressful, but I loved the creative freedom it gave me. 3 months before my birthday, I lost a major client. A startup that had been giving me steady work for nearly a year suddenly went under, leaving me scrambling to find new clients. I was open with Marcus and Sophie about my financial concerns, and they seemed understanding. Marcus even told me not to worry about being a few days late with my portion of the rent. That was the thing about our friendship, or so I thought. We had each other's backs. When Sophie needed help preparing for a big presentation, I stayed up all night designing her slides. When Marcus's car broke down, I lent him mine for 2 weeks. We were a team supporting each other through thick and thin. Or at least, that's what I believed, until my 28th birthday changed everything. In retrospect, the changes started about 6 months before my birthday. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I dismissed the strange feeling in my gut as paranoia. Marcus and Sophie began spending more time together without me. They would go for coffee on Sunday mornings while I was still asleep, or catch a movie when I was busy with a deadline. There were hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room, secret smiles exchanged over dinner, text messages that made Sophie giggle and blush. But whenever I asked what was going on, they brushed it off as work, stress, or inside jokes about people at Sophie's office that I wouldn't understand. Sophie's attitude toward me gradually shifted. She became more critical of small things, dishes I left in the sink, my design materials spread across the dining table, the way I loaded the dishwasher. She would sigh loudly when entering the bathroom after I used it, commenting on water spots on the mirror or hair in the drain. These were things she had never cared about before, and her sudden perfectionism felt targeted. One night, I overheard Sophie complaining to Marcus about me. "I can't keep living like this," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. "The apartment is always a mess because of her. It's like living with a child." Marcus's response was too quiet for me to hear, but the silence that followed felt heavy with betrayal. I stood frozen outside the kitchen, wondering when I had become such a burden to my best friends. As my financial situation worsened, my anxiety grew. I lost sleep worrying about rent, utilities, and student loan payments. The dark circles under my eyes became a permanent feature, and I found myself drinking too much coffee and skipping meals to save money. I picked up small design jobs that paid poorly but helped keep me afloat. When rent day came around, I was still $200 short. With a knot in my stomach, I approached Marcus while he was making breakfast. "I'm really sorry," I began, twisting my hands nervously. "I'm still short on rent. Can I pay you back when my next client pays me? It should only be a few days late." Marcus smiled and put his arm around my shoulders. "Don't worry about it, Rose. We're family. Remember, I know you're good for it." His kindness brought tears to my eyes, and I hugged him tightly, grateful for such an understanding friend. Meanwhile, Sophie's career was flourishing. She received a promotion to senior marketing manager, which came with a substantial raise and a corner office. She started buying expensive clothes, getting weekly manicures, and talking about luxury brands I could never afford. While I was happy for her success, each achievement seemed to widen the gap between us. Sophie began hosting dinner parties for her colleagues, asking me to either stay in my room or make myself scarce. "These are important people, Rose," she would say, with a condescending smile. "I need to make a good impression." I would nod and retreat to my bedroom, feeling increasingly like an outsider in my own home. The tension between us grew after a particularly heated argument about the living room. I had been working on a rush project and left my sketches and tablet on the coffee table overnight. Sophie came home from work and immediately started gathering my things, roughly shoving expensive equipment into a pile. "I have colleagues coming over in an hour," she snapped when I protested. "The apartment needs to look presentable for once." "You could have just asked me to clean up," I replied carefully, rescuing my tablet from the bottom of the pile. You don't have to be so aggressive about it. I shouldn't have to ask. You're an adult, Rose Marie. Act like one. Marcus, who had been watching from the doorway, didn't say a word in my defense. His silence hurt more than Sophie's harsh words. Trying to mend the growing rift, I decided to cook a special dinner for the three of us. I spent my last $50 on ingredients for Marcus's favorite lasagna and Sophie's preferred wine. I cleaned the apartment, meticulously lit candles, and set the table beautifully. Then I waited, and waited, and waited. Neither of them came home that night. My calls went to voicemail, and my texts received brief replies hours later. Working late from Sophie. Caught up with friends, sorry, from Marcus. The lasagna went cold, the candles burned down, and I sat alone at our perfectly set table feeling more isolated than ever. What I didn't know then was that they weren't working late or with friends. They were together making plans that would soon turn my world upside down. My 28th birthday fell on a Friday, and despite the growing tension in our apartment, I was determined to make it special. I had the day off from my part-time cafe job, so I spent the morning cleaning the apartment and decorating with a few balloons I had picked up. Money was tight, but I splurged on a bottle of Prosecco and ingredients to make my mom's special pasta recipe. It wasn't much of a celebration, but it was the best I could do. Around noon, I received a text from Marcus, "Happy birthday, Rose, Sophie. And I will be home early, with a special surprise for you. Don't make dinner plans." My heart lifted. Maybe things weren't as bad as I thought. Maybe they had noticed my efforts to be a better roommate. Maybe our friendship was still salvageable. I spent the afternoon getting ready, putting on a little makeup, and my favorite blue dress that I saved for special occasions. At 6, I heard keys in the lock. Marcus entered first, followed by Sophie. They looked strange. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes, and Sophie had an unsettling smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus was holding a small cake from the bakery down the street, and Sophie clutched a white envelope. "Happy birthday," they said in unison, but their voices lacked the warmth of genuine celebration. I blew out the single candle on the cake and thanked them with a smile that felt forced. The atmosphere in the room was tense, nothing like the birthday celebrations we had shared in previous years. "We have something for you," Sophie said, extending the white envelope toward me. Her manicured nails were painted a deep red like blood against the white paper, a special gift. I took the envelope, expecting perhaps a gift card or concert tickets. Maybe they had pooled their money to help with my portion of next month's rent. The thought made me emotional. I had been so worried about money lately. With hopeful fingers, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. As I unfolded it, my heart dropped to my stomach. It was an official eviction notice, giving me 30 days to vacate the apartment. I looked up at them, confused and hurt. Is this some kind of joke? Sophie's smile widened, taking on a cruel edge I had never seen before. "Not a joke, Rose. Marcus and I need the apartment to ourselves." "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why would you?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice unnaturally formal. "Sophie and I have been seeing each other for the past few months. We're engaged now, and we want to start our life together. This apartment is the first step." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My best friend and my roommate engaged, and they were kicking me out on my birthday. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "You could have told me," I managed to say, fighting back tears. "You didn't have to do it like this." Sophie shrugged, her perfectly shaped eyebrows raised. "We've actually been planning this for a while. Your birthday just seemed like a convenient time since we'd all be home." "Convenient," I repeated the word, tasting bitter in my mouth. "You thought it would be convenient to to ruin my birthday. Oh, come on, Sophie said with an eye roll. It's just a birthday. And honestly, Rose, we've been carrying you for months. Your constant money problems, the mess you leave everywhere, your late-night crying sessions that keep us awake, we've had enough. Each word felt like a slap. I had no idea they felt this way. Yes, I had been struggling financially, but I always tried to pull my weight in other ways. Cooking meals, running errands, being emotionally supportive. I thought that was what friends did for each other. I've been going through a rough patch, I said, my voice small. I thought you understood. Marcus at least had the decency to look ashamed. Sophie, however, doubled down. A rough patch that's lasted almost a year. Please, the truth is you're not reliable, Rose. You're almost 30, and you can't even pay your bills on time. It's pathetic. That word, pathetic, cut deeper than anything else. I had used it on myself during my darkest moments, but hearing it from someone I considered family was devastating. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, reality setting in. I can't afford a place on my own right now. Sophie's laugh was cold. That's not our problem. Maybe you should have thought about that before deciding to be a struggling artist. The real world requires actual planning, Rose. I looked at Marcus silently, pleading for him to say something to defend me, to show some sign of the friendship we had shared for 6 years. But he just stared at the floor, his arms crossed defensively across his chest. This is for the best, he finally said, still not meeting my eyes. For all of us. In that moment, I realized that the Marcus I knew, or thought I knew, was gone. The man standing before me was a stranger wearing my best friend's face. The betrayal was complete. I stood there holding the eviction notice in my trembling hands as Sophie pulled Marcus toward her room. We'll let you process this, she said over her shoulder. But the notice is official. 30 days, Rose. As their door closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, still in my blue birthday dress, still surrounded by the balloons I had hung that morning. The Prosecco sat unopened on the counter. The pasta ingredients remained in their shopping bag. My birthday cake, a small, pitiful thing with one unlit candle, sat on the coffee table, a mockery of celebration. In the silence of our once happy home, I allowed myself to cry. I don't remember how long I sat on that couch, tears streaming down my face. The eviction notice crumpled in my hand. The shock had given way to a hollow ache that spread through my entire body. 6 years of friendship, 3 years of living together like family, and this was how it ended, with a cruel dismissal on what should have been a day of celebration. As the initial shock faded, my mind began to race, piecing together all the signs I had missed. The hushed conversations, the secret smiles, the increasing criticism of my habits. It all suddenly made sense. Marcus and Sophie hadn't just recently gotten together. They had been sneaking around behind my back for months, planning their future while systematically pushing me out of it. The worst part wasn't even losing my home. It was the double betrayal. My 2 closest friends had not only fallen in love without telling me, but had also decided I was disposable, a burden they could discard when convenient. 6 years of shared experiences, secrets, support, and love meant nothing to them. I was just an inconvenience, standing in the way of their perfect life together. I went to my room and closed the door, unable to bear the thought of running into them again that night. The walls that had once felt protective now seemed to close in on me. Photos of the 3 of us from happier times stared back at me from my dresser. A trip to the beach last summer, our Christmas party, 2 years ago, Sophie's birthday celebration at that rooftop bar. I turned the frames face down, unable to look at those false smiles any longer. Wiping my eyes, I began to assess my situation practically. I had 30 days to find a new place, but my financial situation was dire. Opening my wallet, I counted out my remaining cash, $67. My bank account held barely enough to cover my student loan payment. How was I supposed to afford first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit on a new apartment? As I sat on my bed calculating impossible budgets, I heard laughter from Sophie's room. Their voices carried through the thin walls discussing wedding plans and how they would redecorate the apartment once I was gone. Sophie mentioned turning my room into a home office. Marcus suggested they could finally get that sectional couch she had been wanting. "I can't believe we waited so long to do this," Sophie said, her voice clear, despite the closed doors between us. "Imagine how much better the last few months would have been without having to tiptoe around her feelings." "I know," Marcus replied. "But at least it's done now. And once she's out, we can really start our life together." Their casual cruelty ignited something in me. I had been sitting there feeling sorry for myself, allowing their actions to make me feel worthless. But I wasn't worthless. I hadn't done anything to deserve this treatment. Yes, I was struggling financially, but that was temporary. Yes, I sometimes left dishes in the sink or art supplies on the table, but those were minor inconveniences, not justifications for throwing someone out on their birthday. I wiped my tears and straightened my spine. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I would leave with dignity, and I would rebuild my life without them. But first, I needed a plan. I texted Allison, a friend from my part-time cafe job, explaining my situation in brief terms. She immediately offered her couch until I could find a permanent solution. Her kindness, in contrast to Marcus and Sophie's betrayal, brought fresh tears to my eyes. But these were tears of gratitude rather than despair. That night, I began packing my belongings, working quietly to avoid another confrontation. As I sorted through years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep and what to discard, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Each item I packed was one step toward my new life, a life without false friends and conditional love. The next morning, Marcus left early for work. As I was making coffee, Sophie emerged from her room looking surprised to see me in the kitchen. "You're still here," she said, her tone suggesting she had expected me to vanish overnight. "I have 30 days, I replied calmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "But don't worry, I'll be out sooner. I wouldn't want to impose on your happiness any longer than necessary." She seemed taken aback by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. Without another word, she grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl and retreated to her room. Later that day, while both Marcus and Sophie were out, I remembered that Marcus had asked me to check something on his phone a few weeks ago, while his hands were full with groceries. Out of curiosity and a growing suspicion, I checked his text messages with Sophie from that period. What I found confirmed my worst fears. They had been planning to evict me for over 2 months. There were detailed discussions about the best time to do it, how to phrase the eviction, and what they would do with my room once I was gone. Most hurtfully, there was a message from Marcus saying, "Don't worry about telling her not to stress about rent. It doesn't matter if she's late since we're kicking her out anyway." I took screenshots of these messages, sending them to my own phone as evidence. Not that I needed proof of their betrayal. The eviction notice was evidence enough, but something told me these messages might be useful someday. As I stared at those cold, calculating exchanges, something hardened inside me. The sadness and shock were still there, but they were now accompanied by a quiet, simmering anger. Marcus and Sophie hadn't just ended our friendship. They had manipulated and lied to me for months. They had watched me struggle financially, assuring me everything was fine while plotting behind my back. In that moment, sitting alone in our once shared kitchen, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them now. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my anger or hurt. I would leave quietly, rebuild my life, and wait. Because someday, there would be an opportunity to show them exactly what their betrayal had cost. Not just me, but themselves as well. They thought this eviction notice was the end of our story. They were wrong. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one they never saw coming. Moving in with Allison was a humbling experience. Her one-bedroom apartment in Bushwick was barely big enough for her, let alone an additional person with 3 suitcases and a broken heart. But she welcomed me with open arms, clearing out a corner of her living room and helping me set up a makeshift bedroom behind a folding screen. "Stay as long as you need," she said, handing me a spare key and a clean towel. "We'll figure this out together." The first week was the hardest. I woke up each morning momentarily confused by my surroundings, reaching for my phone to check messages from Marcus and Sophie out of habit, before remembering they were no longer my friends. I cried in the shower on the subway during my lunch breaks at the cafe. The grief felt physical, like an actual weight pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. But life doesn't stop for heartbreak. Bills still needed to be paid. Clients still expected their projects on time, and the clock was ticking on finding a more permanent living situation. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, stayed up late, completing graphic design projects, and spent every spare minute searching for affordable apartments. 2 weeks after moving out, I found a tiny studio in a less desirable part of town. It was a 5th-floor walk-up with a shower in the kitchen and windows that faced a brick wall, but it was mine. The rent was just within my budget if I continued working double shifts and took on more freelance work. Allison helped me move in, and together we turned the shabby space into something that felt almost like home. "It's not much," I said, as we stood in the middle of my new place surveying the futon that served as both my bed and couch, the folding table that was my dining area, and workspace, the hot plate that constituted my kitchen. "It's a beginning," Allison corrected me with a smile. "And beginnings are powerful things." She was right. This tiny, imperfect space represented my independence, my resilience, my refusal to be broken by betrayal. I painted one wall a bright yellow to combat the lack of natural light. I hung fairy lights around my bed area. I placed a small pot of basil on my windowsill, a touch of life and growth amid the concrete surroundings. As I settled into my new routine, I tried to focus on moving forward, but my curiosity about Marcus and Sophie remained. I found myself checking their social media accounts more often than I cared to admit, watching from a distance as they flaunted their engagement and upcoming wedding. Sophie's Instagram became a carefully curated display of their perfect life together. There were photos of them at fancy restaurants, shopping for wedding venues, picking out rings. Each post was accompanied by saccharine captions about finding her soulmate and building their dream life together. One post in particular caught my attention. Sophie was showing off their newly redecorated apartment, my former home, with a caption thanking Marcus for making this dream possible. In the comments, she mentioned that they had used extra money from the apartment to fund some of the renovations. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I realized she was referring to my security deposit, which they had clearly kept despite my leaving the apartment in perfect condition. This discovery reignited the anger I had been trying to suppress. It wasn't just about the money, though I certainly could have used it. It was about the principle. They had taken something that was rightfully mine and used it to further their own comfort and happiness without a second thought about how their actions affected me. A few days later, I ran into James, a mutual friend from college, at a coffee shop near my new place. His surprise at seeing me quickly turned to concern when I mentioned my new living situation. Wait, Marcus. And Sophie kicked you out. On your birthday, he asked, his expression darkening. That's cold, even for Sophie. Even for Sophie, I repeated, catching the implication in his words. James hesitated, then sighed. Look, I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but Marcus has been saying some pretty harsh things about you to our friend group, claiming you were a terrible roommate, that you never paid rent on time, that you were emotionally manipulative. The accusations felt like physical blows. None of that is true, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I was late with rent once when I lost my biggest client, and I always made it up to them in other ways, cooking, cleaning, running errands. I figured as much, James replied, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. For what it's worth, not everyone believes him. Some of us remember how you were there for him when his dad was sick, or how you helped Sophie prepare for that big interview. But they've been controlling the narrative since you've been gone. I thanked James for his honesty and promised to stay in touch. As I walked home, my mind raced with this new information. Not only had Marcus and Sophie betrayed me and taken my money, but they were also actively working to turn our mutual friends against me, rewriting history to cast me as the villain in their story. That evening, checking my email, I discovered something even more disturbing. A potential client replied to an inquiry I had sent weeks ago, apologizing for the delay, but explaining they had received concerning information about my work ethic and reliability from a trusted source in the industry. The email was vague, but the timing aligned perfectly with when Sophie would have received the automated email notification about my inquiry. Her company and this client had worked together in the past. With growing suspicion, I searched my email for any other rejected opportunities around that time. There were 3 more, all with similar vague explanations about not being the right fit or going in a different direction. All were connected to Sophie's professional network. The pieces clicked into place. Sophie hadn't just been content to force me out of our home and friendship. She had actively tried to sabotage my professional opportunities, cutting off potential income sources when she knew I was already struggling financially. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from Sophie. My heart raced as I opened it, wondering if she had somehow discovered I was onto her. But it wasn't an accusation or even an acknowledgement of her actions. It was a wedding invitation sent to me, along with what appeared to be a mass mailing to everyone in their social circle. The invitation was elegant, with flowing script, announcing their ceremony at an expensive venue upstate, followed by a reception at a renowned vineyard. The date was set for 3 months from now. At the bottom was a personal note. Hope you can make it. It wouldn't be the same without all our friends there to celebrate with us. Exo, Sophie, and Marcus. I stared at the invitation, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. After everything they had done, they had the audacity to invite me to celebrate their love. A love that had been built on lies and nurtured through betrayal. It felt like one final twist of the knife, one last way to demonstrate their power over me. But as I studied the invitation, an idea began to form. They wanted me at their wedding. Fine, I would be there. But not as the sad, pathetic ex-friend they expected. I would come with a gift, one they would never forget. I carefully placed the invitation on my small desk and opened my laptop. If I was going to attend this wedding, I had preparations to make, and for the first time since my birthday, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than my grief. The 3 months leading up to Marcus and Sophie's wedding passed in a blur of focused determination. By day, I worked my regular shifts at the cafe and built my freelance business back up, carefully avoiding any clients connected to Sophie's network. By night, I meticulously prepared my wedding gift, pouring all my graphic design skills and emotional energy into creating something truly memorable. As the wedding date approached, I received a text from Marcus, the first direct communication since the eviction. Just checking if you're coming to the wedding. Need to finalize numbers for the caterer. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened between us. Just a practical question, as if we were casual acquaintances rather than former best friends. "I'll be there," I replied simply. I could almost picture his surprise at my response, his uncertainty about what it meant. Good. Let him wonder. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I dressed with deliberate care, selecting a sophisticated navy blue dress that was elegant without being flashy. I wanted to look composed and successful, not like someone who had been sleeping on a futon in a fifth-floor walk-up for the past 3 months. I applied my makeup carefully, styled my hair into a sleek updo, and put on the pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Gone was the heartbroken girl who had cried on Allison's couch. In her place stood a woman with purpose and quiet strength. The wedding venue was as lavish as I expected, a historic mansion set on sprawling grounds with manicured gardens and a view of the Hudson River. Luxury cars filled the parking area, and well-dressed guests mingled on the lawn, champagne flutes in hand. Sophie had always had expensive tastes, and it was clear no expense had been spared for her special day. As I approached the guest book table, I noticed several familiar faces from our college days turned to look at me, whispering among themselves. James spotted me and hurried over, concern written across his features. "Rose, I'm surprised you came," he said quietly, guiding me away from curious onlookers. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" I smiled reassuringly. "I'm fine, James. Really, some things are worth showing up for." My cryptic response didn't seem to ease his worry, but he nodded and walked with me to find our seats for the ceremony. The wedding program listed me as seated in the back row, as far from the action as possible, while still technically included. Perfect. I didn't want to be front and center for what was about to happen anyway. The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance Sophie had undoubtedly demanded. Classical music played by a string quartet, flowers everywhere, a procession of bridesmaids in blush pink gowns. When Sophie appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm, there were audible gasps. She looked stunning in a custom designer gown, her blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo adorned with tiny flowers. Marcus waited at the altar, beaming with pride and love. Looking at them so perfect and happy, I felt a momentary twinge of doubt. Was I really going to go through with this? Was it worth potentially ruining their special day? But then I remembered the cruel laughter on my birthday, the security deposit they had stolen, the professional opportunities Sophie had sabotaged, the lies they had spread about me among our friends. This wasn't about petty revenge, it was about consequences for cruel actions. It was about truth. The ceremony proceeded without a hitch. They exchanged traditional vows, slipped rings onto each other's fingers, and sealed their union with a kiss as guests applauded. Sophie's father dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief, clearly moved by the beautiful ceremony his money had purchased. If only he knew the true character of the woman he had just proudly given away. The reception was held in a massive tent set up on the mansion's back lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling tables, were adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces, and a live band played soft music as guests found their assigned seats. I was placed at a table in the far corner with distant acquaintances, the table for people who had to be invited but weren't really wanted. Dinner was served, speeches were given. Sophie's father toasted to their bright future together. Marcus's best man told sanitized stories of their college days, carefully edited to portray Marcus as always, having been the perfect gentleman he clearly wasn't. Sophie's maid of honor gushed about what an amazing friend Sophie had always been, how loyal and supportive she was to those she loved. I nearly choked on my champagne at that particular lie. Finally, the moment arrived for the presentation of gifts. The MC announced that gifts could be placed on the designated table near the dance floor, but that any guests wishing to personally present their gifts to the couple could do so now. This was my cue. With my carefully wrapped package in hand, I approached the head table where Marcus and Sophie sat in their finery, looking for all the world like the perfect couple. Sophie's eyes widened when she saw me walking toward them. Marcus paled slightly, his smile faltering. They had probably expected me to drop my gift off discreetly and leave early, not to approach them directly in front of everyone. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady and clear as I placed the beautifully wrapped package before them. It was a large, flat rectangle, elegantly packaged in silver paper with a white satin ribbon. It looked expensive and tasteful, exactly the kind of gift Sophie would appreciate for its appearance alone. "Thank you for coming," Rose Marcus managed to say, though. His voice cracked slightly on my name. Sophie just nodded, eyeing the package suspiciously. "What is it?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "Something special," I replied with a small smile. "I designed it myself. I think you'll find it memorable." Other guests were watching now, intrigued by this interaction. Sophie, never one to pass up being the center of attention, began to unwrap the gift with a forced smile. Marcus leaned in close, both curious and apprehensive. Inside the silver paper was a beautifully crafted album, bound in white leather, with Marcus and Sophie the whole story, embossed in elegant gold script on the cover. It looked like a custom wedding album, the kind couples pay hundreds of dollars for. "How thoughtful," Sophie said, her tone suggesting the opposite. But she opened the cover nonetheless, with Marcus peering over her shoulder. The first page contained a beautiful photograph of the three of us, from happier times, with an elegantly typeset quote about friendship and loyalty. Sophie flipped to the next page, clearly expecting more of the same sentimental content. Instead, she found printouts of the text messages I had discovered between her and Marcus, planning my eviction weeks in advance. The messages were artfully arranged on the page, with key phrases highlighted in gold. "She'll never suspect anything. We can use her security deposit for the wedding. Just keep telling her not to worry about the rent." Sophie's face drained of color. Marcus made a strangled noise beside her, but they couldn't stop now. Too many curious guests were watching, waiting to see their reaction to my thoughtful gift. Page after page revealed their betrayal in exquisite detail. The emails Sophie had sent to potential clients, warning them against working with me. The false stories Marcus had spread among our mutual friends. Screenshots of Sophie's Instagram posts showing off renovations paid for with my security deposit. All beautifully presented like a high-end scrapbook of deceit. The final page contained a receipt, a donation made in their names to a homeless shelter for exactly the amount of my security deposit that they had kept. Beneath it, I had written a simple message. Some people lose their homes due to circumstances beyond their control. Others lose their integrity by choice. Congratulations on your wedding. Sophie slammed the album shut, her face a mask of fury and embarrassment. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Around us, guests who had gathered to see the gift were whispering, confused by the couple's reaction to what appeared to be a beautiful album. "What is wrong with you, Sophie?" hissed, quiet enough that only Marcus and I could hear. How dare you try to ruin our wedding? I maintained my composure, smiling gently. I didn't ruin anything, Sophie. I simply brought some truth to the celebration. After all, isn't marriage supposed to be built on honesty? By now, Sophie's parents had approached, concerned by their daughter's obvious distress. "What's going on?" her father asked, looking between us with confusion. "Is everything all right?" Before Sophie could respond, her mother picked up the album, curious about what had caused such a reaction. Sophie lunged to grab it from her, but she was too late. As her mother began to flip through the pages, her expression changed from curiosity to shock to disappointment. "Sophie, what is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you really do these things to your friend?" The whispers around us grew louder. More guests were gathering, sensing drama unfolding. Marcus attempted damage control, claiming the album was full of misunderstandings and things taken out of context, but the evidence was too clear, too damning. Sophie's father took the album from his wife, his face darkening, as he read the messages about using my security deposit for wedding expenses. Expenses he had largely paid for. "We raised you better than this," he said, his disappointment palpable. Other guests began to ask questions, the whispers turning into open speculation. James approached, took one look at the album, now being passed among curious hands, and gave me a subtle nod of understanding. He had known something was wrong with their story all along. As the murmurs grew and the beautiful reception began to fracture into awkward clusters of confused guests, I quietly made my exit. I had said nothing, had made no scene. I had simply presented them with the truth of their own actions, beautifully packaged and impossible to deny. Walking away from the mansion toward the parking area, I heard someone calling my name. Turning, I saw Marcus running after me, his face flushed and tie askew. "Rose, wait!" he panted, catching up to me. "Why did you do that? Why couldn't you just let us be happy?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The man I had once considered my best friend, my family, now seemed like a stranger. And in that moment, I felt nothing but pity for him. "I didn't do anything to your happiness, Marcus," I said quietly. "If your happiness can be destroyed by people simply knowing the truth about your actions, then it wasn't real happiness to begin with." I turned and continued walking, feeling lighter with each step. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of the wedding reception continuing, but now with an undercurrent of tension and whispers. Some guests were leaving early. Others were gathered in small groups, clearly discussing what they had just witnessed. As I drove away from the mansion, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. There were no tears, no anger, no regret. For the first time since my birthday 6 months ago, I felt completely at peace with myself and my actions. The wound of betrayal had finally begun to heal, not because I had sought revenge, but because I had reclaimed my narrative and my power. They had given me an eviction notice on my birthday. I had given them truth on their wedding day. We were now even. 6 months after the wedding, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined on that painful birthday. My tiny studio apartment now served as both my home and the headquarters of my fledgling design agency. What had started as solo freelance work had grown into a small business with 2 part-time employees and a roster of loyal clients. The cafe job was behind me, replaced by the full-time pursuit of my passion. The space itself had evolved, too. I had saved enough to upgrade from the futon to a real bed, added a proper desk, an ergonomic chair, and installed floating shelves to maximize the limited square footage. The yellow accent wall now featured a gallery of my best design work, a daily reminder of how far I had come. My social circle had shifted dramatically. Allison had introduced me to her friends, many of whom worked in creative fields and understood the struggles of building a career in the arts. We gathered for potluck dinners, supported each other's projects, and created the kind of genuine community I had once thought I had with Marcus and Sophie. James had become a close friend as well. After the wedding incident, he had reached out to tell me that several mutual acquaintances had contacted him, wanting to reconnect with me and hear my side of the story. The narrative Marcus and Sophie had carefully constructed had crumbled in the face of the evidence I presented at their wedding. I met with those who reached out not to badmouth my former friends, but simply to re-establish connections that had been severed by lies. As for Marcus and Sophie, I heard through the grapevine that they had canceled their honeymoon to Italy. Sophie's parents, deeply disappointed by their daughter's behavior, had apparently withdrawn some of their financial support. The perfect image Sophie had cultivated on social media had developed cracks with fewer posts and noticeably less engagement from friends. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as I was finishing up work on a branding project, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it, I was surprised to see a message from Marcus. "Rose, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. What Sophie and I did to you was cruel and selfish. There's no excuse for how we treated you. The album you brought to our wedding was humiliating, but we deserved it. I've spent months thinking about the kind of person I became with Sophie, and I don't like him very much. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just wanted you to know that I recognize the harm we caused. I hope you're doing well." I read the message 3 times, waiting for the anger or hurt to rise up, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a calm acceptance. His apology didn't undo the pain they had caused, but it acknowledged it, which was more than I had ever expected from either of them. I didn't respond to the text, not out of spite or lingering resentment, but because that chapter of my life was closed. Marcus and Sophie belonged to my past, and I was focused on building my future. Whatever journey of realization or regret Marcus was on now was his to walk alone. Looking back on the whole experience, I could see how that painful eviction notice had ultimately set me free. Had I continued living with them, I might have remained comfortable but stagnant, accepting less than I deserved in both friendship and professional growth. Being forced out of my comfort zone had pushed me to build something that was truly mine, something no one could take away with a cruel gesture or a legal document. The betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about self-worth and resilience. I had learned that true friends support you during difficult times rather than punishing you for them. I had discovered that my value as a person wasn't determined by my bank account balance or my ability to maintain a spotless kitchen. Most importantly, I had found the courage to stand up for myself, to refuse to be written out of my own story. I no longer carried anger toward Marcus and Sophie. Anger requires energy, and I had better uses for my energy now. Instead, I felt grateful for the harsh wake-up call that had forced me to build a better life. The pain had been real and devastating, but it had been temporary. The strength I had discovered within myself would last a lifetime. Sometimes I thought about the album I had created for their wedding. It hadn't been about revenge, not really. It had been about truth, about refusing to let them control the narrative of who I was and what had happened between us. In presenting their actions back to them beautifully designed and impossible to deny, I had reclaimed my power and my voice. As the rain tapped against my windows, I shut down my computer and made a cup of tea. My tiny apartment felt peaceful, a sanctuary I had created for myself. From my window I could see just a sliver of the Brooklyn skyline, 2A, a reminder of how small my space was in the grand scheme of the city, but it was mine. No one could evict me from this life I had built. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to discover who we truly are. The eviction notice they gave me that day wasn't just the end of a home, it was the beginning of finding myself. Have you ever experienced betrayal that ultimately led to positive change in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember that sometimes the harshest endings make way for the most beautiful beginnings. Share this with someone who might need to hear that their current struggle could be the doorway to something better.